Tom, welcome to Servturn Sunday interview.
Good morning, Peter. It's nice to be with you and your listeners.
Tom Williams is a worldwide sales trainer and a writer of several books. And today we would like to host a session about his first book in the series. It is The Seller's Challenge. What made you decide to become a sales trainer?
Well, it's kind of an interesting story, Peter. I was initially doing sales consulting work and actually selling sales training. And I had several clients ask me to do the training because of my background. And once I started doing it, I found that I really enjoyed it. And I've been able to develop, as a result, some great business relationships, great personal relationships through doing it. But as an aside, I really never considered myself to be a sales trainer. I always considered myself to be more a facilitator, someone who helped the students, or the sales professionals, learn on their own.
Okay, wow. I've really got to know you as a facilitator. And, in the preparation to this interview, I've really been able to get to know you as a person that really wants to help. And I think that's the most important thing in sales today.
Yeah, I mean, sales at the bottom, if you really think about what sales is, Peter, it's all about helping, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I enjoy doing. So it's interestingly enough, I've been in healthcare, most of my life, and healthcare is really, a helping and healing profession. So the two kind of go nicely together.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Tom, can you explain the process of researching and writing a book as comprehensive as this?
Yeah, I think, what, I'll tell you the approach that Tom Sane and I did, and I don't know if this is the same approach that every author does, but we defined a list of the chapters that we thought would be beneficial. And really what they were these were questions that came up in training and facilitation programs that Tom and I did. There's routine challenges that sales professionals encountered daily. And so we defined a list of the chapters, and then we really sat down and thought very hard about what do we want in the way of a structure of each chapter. And so we finally agreed that what we would do is have a title for each chapter. We'd have it was kind of snappy and it would get people's attention. We wanted a quote from a noted sales author that would kind of tie to that chapter that people could relate to. And then we wanted to go through and tell a story, at the very beginning, that a story that every sales professional could react to and say, I've been in that situation, or I know somebody who has been in that situation, and they can say, this is going to be a fun chapter to read. And then we walked through what this actual sales challenge was. We also wanted to put a lot of bullets and things in there, make it easy for people to read, and also some things that they can extract out. So you'll see a lot of bullets, a lot of figures, in there. And then we also wanted to put in like recommended actions, key points to remember, and then some appendices, again, tools that sales reps could download and use that would help them. That was really the kind of the structure of it. And then we did a lot of research, researched articles, books, the web, etc., listened to podcasts on the different topics. And then we sent each chapter to a minimum of 4 experts on that particular topic for review. We wanted to make sure that we flushed it out and in the content, and made sure that the content was accurate. We really wanted to be best practices on how to solve these particular thorny issues.
That's why I think it's absolutely it's like the sales handbook. It's something you can go back to, hone your skills and become a better sales. And there's not a lot of books like that out there. Most of them just tell a motivating story and have 1 or 2 sales points in there. You guys have done a really good job of making it such a concise sales book.
Well, I appreciate that. That really was one of the goals, Peter. We really wanted this to be, not only a book that people could read, but also a reference book. And it's deliberately written that each chapter stands on its own. And so if you only want to read certain chapters, you can do that, and so it was designed with a lot of different points like that in mind.
So you just mentioned Tom Sane, of course, your co-author. What was the added value of working with him as a writing team?
Yeah, I think it was phenomenal to have Tom involved. I think for a lot of reasons. One is We both had extensive sales experience, but what was interesting, Peter, is we both worked, and sold in markedly different industries, and so as a result, I think we ended up with a wider, deeper, richer perspective on all these issues. And there were times that, we went head to head together, and said, hey, we need to do it this way, that way. So I think it was invaluable from widening both of our perspectives and allowing us to also build in a lot of real life stories that if we hadn't collaborated, we probably would end up with about half of them for each of us. So really, I think it worked out well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah. So that is definitely something you could probably tell other people who write book. Maybe do it with somebody else, and you're probably more motivated and you have more ideas.
Yeah, I think it would certainly work for us. I think we developed a good relationship as we went through it. We very rarely argued about anything, and I think what it allowed us to do was always see a different perspective, and challenge each other to try to, lift the bar and make the book better. And hopefully that's what we do. Hopefully we succeeded with that.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, thank you.
And we spoke earlier, and you said in the beginning, after releasing books, you didn't get that much feedback. At the moment, you've been doing a lot of interviews. You're getting a whole lot of feedback on Amazon and other places. You have over 50 reviews, so that's pretty impressive. How has writing the book changed your life?
Well, it's interesting, Peter. I think what it's done is it's really, from my perspective, it's allowed me to develop a lot of great relationships with a variety of people. So, for example, podcast hosts like yourself, people like you that have invited me on the program to talk sales or to talk about a specific aspect of the book. That's been a wonderful, experience. Um, Fellow authors, have reached out, and so I now know, a majority of the authors of sales books from around the globe, and we become friends, and we've exchanged ideas and constantly. And I think that would never have happened without the book. And I think the third thing, and what you kind of touched on, was the readers. Many of the readers of one of the books have reached out to me, and asked a question or just begun a relationship. And that's been really enjoyable. It's been beneficial. It's been really, really rewarding. And so I think those are the main ways that the book has changed my life.
Okay, well, that sounds like a really nice path that you're now set on. Of course, my question before we move on to the more book-related questions, of course, will there be another sequel for the series? I mean, these two books are phenomenal. And of course, it's not easy to write a book. I know because I have written some books and attempted a lot more, but
Yeah.
will there be a sequel?
Well, you never say never. You're right. I think that's always the right thing to say. Let me put it this way: we have enough content that we could do a third book, and I've certainly got some idea. I got an idea on one that I think would be a phenomenal addition to the sales profession. As you know, it just takes a tremendous amount of time and dedication to sit down and do it. So I won't say a definite yes, but I won't say a definite no either.
Well, you
How's
will
that for straddling the fence, Peter?
you'll have one reader for sure. So
Thank you.
yeah, and
Well,
I'm
well,
100%
actually,
sure that
actually, actually, I'll have at least three. You, my mother, and my wife.
yeah, yeah,
And I
yeah.
probably put my daughter in there as well. So I guess I'll have four anyway. So at least be able to sell four copies, right?
Yeah, for sure. So, as we move on to the more book related questions, I would say I have some very specific questions. My first one is in chapter 4, you have a section about listening skills. And we can't mention this enough. Listening is so important. How do you make sure that the prospect client spends more time talking than you?
Yeah, that's a great question, Peter. And I think listening is one of my hot buttons. In the sales profession. I think I think to answer your question, it comes down to preparation, 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 and more preparation. When sales professionals prepare, they ask better questions. They ask questions that, that show their curiosity, that show their depth of perspective. And I think what they do is they ask questions that generally show the prospect, the customer, the buyer, that they really want to help them achieve their outcomes. And so, good questions create a conversation, not an interrogation. And so I think that's what happens is when you ask good questions, then you make the reader or the buyer, the prospect, sit back and really reflect and ask themselves, what's the best way to answer this question? And so I think that's a good start. Between asking good questions. And then I think the second part of it is using the listening skills that you have. We talk about in the book that there's 3 different types of listening skills. There's, selective listening, where you kind of listen to what you want to hear, and you think about this as you're really on a mental vacation. You've got a pretty good idea of what you want to say before the individual even stops talking. Responsive is when you're listening for intent and context, and what you're really trying to do is to keep somebody talking. So I might say, Peter, tell me more about that. Nod my head, or just nod my head to give you permission, or and ask you to keep talking. And then the last part of it is reflective listening, where I really repeat back to you what I think I've heard. So make sure that I thoroughly understand what you've said. And this is really, and listening is a really important skill to develop, because here's an interesting fact for you and for your listeners. Most people can listen and comprehend 250 words per minute. Most people don't even talk more than 150 words a minute. So you've got a gap there that you have of 100 words that you could be listening and comprehending to, that that you have to pay attention to. And so if we don't pay attention to people, it's very easy to not listen and understand thoroughly what they're saying.
Yeah, that's really good. I would say that this is something that you would have to, especially when you're a young sales. So many sales out there, they want to show how good they are, how special they are, how on top of the game they are. But actually, if you just sit back and enjoy the ride, listen to your prospect, you're already winning so much more than when you're going out there and showing the world who you think you are.
Yeah, and you do that by asking really good, thought-provoking questions, right? You would do it by asking questions that really make the buyer or the prospect pause and think, right?
Yeah, absolutely. When we go on to chapter 6, there's another thing that's maybe it's a bit in fashion at the moment, but this chapter is about the status quo. There's a lot of things in the chapter, so I would say to everybody listening today that if you go in and read that chapter, you can find out a lot more. But sometimes a buyer wants this, wants your product, wants your service, but he can't get approval. Now, my question is, how do you approach this? How do you help the buyer find his way through his own company to seal the service for this buyer?
Well, I think the answer to that is several-fold. One is, I'll tell you what we typically do, and that is we try to prevent that from occurring up front by how we interface, with the initial buyer or contact, whatever it is, champion, whatever term you want to use, that initiates the conversation with us. When you have an initial conversation and you have a good opportunity, you have an idea that you have a product or service that can meet their needs. In other words, it will give them the buyer the outcome that they desire. What we do is we typically walk through with them an outcome enablement plan. And really all an outcome enablement plan is a plan between the buyer and the seller to help them achieve their outcomes that they desire. And the way in which we do it is with a simple form where we outline for them, the current state, the future state, what's the gap or the cost of inaction that we call in between? What's the real reason they need to do something? And then really understand, what if they done anything to solve this issue in the past, or in the past? Who is this an organizational priority, and who owns the problem? When you do that, and then you ask the follow-on question of, well, who else, Peter, is also involved in this? Who would be affected by the change? Now what you've done is established who all those other stakeholders are. That then now starts as you develop milestones and you develop activities on this plan to help them buy. What you end up doing is going through things like decision criteria, the decision process. And by going through all of that, you build a relationship with the buyer, and you get introduction to all these other people. And as a result, you don't end up with this problem at the end where they don't want to do anything, because you built the business case along, you built collaboration. And I think this is one of the key things of selling today. And we talk a lot about this in our second book, Buyer-Centered Selling. It's about facilitating, collaboration and helping them build consensus.
Yeah, I'm reading Buyer-Centered Selling at the moment, and yeah, I think it's an awesome follow-up. So we'll talk about that more at a later stage.
All right.
What I wanted to ask you also in chapter 6, because this is just an awesome chapter, you mentioned the high percentages of purchasing approval due to personal interaction. How do you explain the upcoming AI technology and the already large organizations without personal interaction? Why are companies like Amazon and Netflix and so many others so successful without any personal interaction?
Yeah, I think it's all about the helping with the buyer experience, and thoroughly understanding and simplifying that buyer journey, where it becomes point and click and becomes very easy to do. When you're dealing with a large complex sale, or even I think when a lot of us in our personal lives, when you think about how we make decisions on based on emotion, and we justify it with logic. And that's because of the way the human brain works. And we could spend a few minutes and go through that, but it's really how it works. And so what AI is going to do is help you with the emotional, helps you really with the logical portion of making a buying decision. But AI, questions for AI, statements that AI they can build those same things in for emotion. Right. And so you won't even recognize it, but it's around feelings and intent and those types of things. And they can build that in very easily. And so I don't think AI is going to have a big effect, a negative effect at all on what we're talking about in the book. Sellers really just need, at the end of the day, sellers just really need to understand, how do buyers buy? And today buyers are looking for a frictionless buying experience. They want a good experience. They want it to be frictionless. And that's what Amazon has done. That's what Netflix has done, is they've made it very easy to buy. And in most organizations, it's not that way, and that's the problem. And that's going to be the big metamorphosis that's going to have to occur, because you and I are making B2C decisions, and we want those same frictionless, a positive experience that we get with Netflix and Amazon. We want that in our own business situation, and we get frustrated when we can't deliver it.
Yeah, absolutely. So in a sense, a lot of people are weary about AI, but it could be a positive situation for all involved.
I don't think AI is ever going to go in and replace good sales professionals. I mean, there'll be functions and particular things that skills that salespeople do today, or maybe call it task, that AI can do better, or AI can do in lieu of. But I think there's still a myriad of things that sales professionals do on a daily basis that will never be replaced by AI.
No. When gaining early access, you point out in chapter 8 that buyers want a brand neutral insight. Now, I always enjoy that, a brand neutral insight. But at what stage and how can you position your product and service when you are giving brand neutral insight?
I think the key is to earn the right to present your product or service, right? And you have to, you have to not be a talking leaflet. What you have to do is ask good quality questions, frame the problem and frame what's the, understand what the outcome is that the buyer wants, frame the problem, what the cost of an action is to do that. And then, and then and understand all the different stakeholders that are affected by that change. And then understand after that, what is the organizational priority to change, to make the change, and how does each person fit into this myriad. Once you've started to do that, understand questions around each one of those areas with each one of those people. Now what you can start to do is to build in your solution by asking questions around, as they start to formulate what would be the solution requirement to fix this problem, or to capitalize on this opportunity, or to minimize this risk. You start to ask questions that your product or service can handle, but you don't pitch it. You ask questions around, what would be a benefit to you? Would these types of things be a benefit to you? What are you looking for? And when you ask good quality and questions, you start now to frame them and get them thinking about, well, maybe there's some capabilities that we hadn't thought about that we really should have. Then you can logically, after they've done that, now start to begin to talk about your product or service.
Okay, yeah, because I mean, there's so many people out there, they start from literally the first conversation talking about their product or service. And that's the first thing you shouldn't do. And your book really shows why you shouldn't, and why brand neutral insight is really important. So
yeah, it's all about earning the right, isn't it? So about earning the right to talk about your product or service. And if you don't know what they're trying to accomplish, if you don't know what their ultimate goal is and how it's going to affect their outcomes, then what you're doing is just throwing stuff against the wall, hoping something that you said will stick and resonate with them. And that's just not selling. That's telling. That's pitching a product as opposed to helping them with an outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the book really outlines why this is beneficial. And most importantly, that if you are involved in a complex sale or a high value sale, there is no way around brand neutral selling. You have to start with brand neutral insight before you start with anything else. So I thought that was really, really interesting. Chapter 10, last chapter, and that chapter is about pricing. And the name of the chapter, which is, of course, really to the point, the price is never right. And it's probably one of the best pieces about price and negotiation that I have read. Another point in negotiation is often the terms and conditions. Now, this is not necessarily price, but how can you make sure your terms will be accepted? Because this is one of the most difficult things in complex sales processes.
You're really taking me down memory lane here, Peter, with this. By going through here by chapter. You're making me go back and reflect, because we wrote this, several years ago, and then it took a year to get it published. So you're making me think here. I think a couple things, Peter. One is, I always look at terms and conditions is, are they fair and reasonable? And a good way to think about that is if you were going to be buying your own product, would the terms and conditions that you're putting on the customer, would you accept them? And if you wouldn't, you probably ought to reevaluate your terms and conditions, right?
Yeah.
I think the second thing is research the terms and conditions in your industry and of your competitors. That's also a really good benchmark, for all of us to do, and to know, what's really fair and reasonable in the industry. I think, the other part of it is, what I've always done is, if I think there's something that's sticky, and usually the term that's the most sticky is the payment terms, right? It's, your company maybe wants 2 weeks or 30 days payment terms, and the customer you're selling to is 90 days, right?
Yeah.
That's usually where the biggest problem comes in. So, I think if that's going to be a thorny issue, that's the type of thing you want to delve in with early on or upfront with your champion. And the champion to me is somebody who's got power and influence and can get you to the final yes, unless they're going to make a decision by consensus, right, where it's a group decision. But even in a group decision, typically I see that there's somebody that's a final yes that can release the funds. And I think if you talk with that individual and say, look, can we compromise here? You know, I can't give you 90 days. I can give you 45. Can we compromise? Or can you make an exception for us? We're a small company. You're $1 billion company. We're a smaller company. You know, can you make an exception for us and get it done in 30 days? I've never had a problem, you know, with doing negotiation and getting that type of thing done. So I think it comes down to, you know, selling skills. I think it's anticipating, you know, researching again, what's the industry norms, and then really, you know, building a personal relationship with that buyer, you know, and reinforcing to them, you know, what that outcome is they're going to get, you know, and they really need your product or service, and meet them. I won't say halfway, but say meet them, you know, with some type of collaboration that you can both agree to.
Yeah, that sounds absolutely right. Now, we've been talking about the seller's challenge, of course, and about your experience with writing. After the seller's challenge, such a comprehensive sales book, just give us a short glimpse of why you and Tom Sain decided to write the buyer-centered selling.
Well, really, the genesis behind it was we actually wrote both books simultaneously, if you want to know the truth. And what we did is we had so much content that we needed to break it into 2 books. And so what we did is we released the Seller's Challenge first, which was, you know, 10 chapters of initial content, and then we followed up with the buyer-centered selling with another 11 chapters in the second book. And really, the difference between the two is that in the second book, we added in the buyer's challenge as well as the seller's challenge, because what we wanted to do was to now shift people's thinking from just it's all about you as a seller to it's really all about the buyer. And so it was really, if you will, the seller's challenge was kind of the setup to, okay, what's really what we need to be focusing on is the buyer. And, you know, and so that was really the genesis of how it got started.
Wow. That sounds amazing. Tom, I really enjoyed this conversation today. It's really awesome. And at the end of this video, you can go down to the comments and click on the link to the Seller's Challenge on Amazon. I hope, of course, you will join us again for the buyer-centered selling later on in the spring. But for now, I'd like to thank you so much for this interview. And I'm really proud that you've been one of the Servturn guests. You're welcome to come anytime in the future. And anybody out there, if you have questions for Tom, reach out.
Peter, thanks so much for inviting me on the program. I really and thoroughly always enjoy our conversations and thoroughly enjoy your wit and your humor. Love to be back on the program at a future date.
Yeah, maybe we should do one just about sales humor.
Yeah, exactly. We'd probably have an awful lot of fun, wouldn't we?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thanks again, and I'll speak to you soon.
Thank you, Peter.
Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Bye.